What is your full name, sir?
My full name is James, and I have no middle initial, Magellas. My buddies during World War II called me Maggie, and that name has stuck with me since. And you see now a lot of the printing that's out refers to James Maggie Magellas.
How old are you right now?
On Sunday, this Sunday and another day, I'll be 101 years old, which incidentally is the reason I'm here, is because they have an 101st birthday here at this inn, at the Holiday Inn.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and let me interrupt at this point to say that my wife, who's sitting over there, Carol, was also born in Fond du Lac. And so we're two Fond du Lac natives here returning home to celebrate my 101st birthday. But we're both natives of this city of Fond du Lac.
And when were you born, sir?
And March 11th, 1917.
Do you feel like you're 101?
I do, yes. I mean, I felt pretty good until I made it to 100. Something about 100 was a difficult blow in terms of physical, not mental. Fortunately, I can respond to anything, but in terms of falling and losing balance and that sort of thing.
Well, they say the first 100 is always the hardest.
Yeah, that's true.
What branch of the service were you in during World War II?
Well, when I started out, I had a commission, which I got when I graduated from college. I took ROTC, so when I graduated from college, I had a commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. And I was an officer throughout the war, and eventually when I retired, I was a lieutenant colonel. But that was, and I stayed in the reserves.
Just tell me what division, regiment, and company you were in during your time overseas, please.
And that is a unique story in itself, because after I left parachute school in Fort Benning and was shipped overseas to Africa, I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. And also when I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division, I was assigned to the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. And I remained with that regiment from that point forward, from every battle in Italy, at Anzio, the jump in Holland, the Battle of the Bulge, everything. And I remained with that same unit. And I was in not only that same unit, but I was in H Company of the 3rd Battalion of the 504th Infantry Regiment. And I was that all the time that I was overseas. And people will say to me occasionally, and I'm just spicing this up for you, that you were still a lieutenant? You didn't get all the promotions? And my answer to that was, I was offered bigger jobs, staff jobs. But by accepting that, it meant that I would leave my combat unit to go to what I call the rear echelon. I mean, it wasn't where you smelled the gunpowder like I did leading a platoon. And I preferred, and this is an honest statement, I've said it many times, I preferred to remain a lieutenant and lead a platoon in battle and lead young men, many just out of high school, that needed an experienced hand and someone that was more than just a platoon leader. So I felt a particular attachment to it, and every time I was offered, say, to go back to the battalion and be on the staff, I turned it down, although it meant I would have gotten promoted right away. I didn't care about that. I wasn't in the war for that purpose. I can tell you honestly that when I joined the service and we were at war, it was a question of fighting for those things that we believed in. And they always say, for our mission was for those things we believed in greater than ourselves. And that was the influencing factor. When people ask me, well, when you marched down Fifth Avenue in New York, you were still a lieutenant. Everybody else I was there was major and so on. I said, that's because I refused to accept promotion and leave my position. And the whole war, include marching down Fifth Avenue, New York, I led that platoon. Now that is a unique story. There's nobody, I don't know if anybody that ever wrote anything or ever did anything that can say that and say it sincerely and repetitively, like I do. I mean, I don't just say it once because it sounds good. I've made at least 500 speeches. And when that comes up, it's always the same thing. I preferred to be on the cutting edge of the battlefield with the men who were fighting and dying.
Just scooch over slightly for me. Sir, you grew up in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, correct?
That is correct.
Talk to me about growing up during the Great Depression. What were the struggles that your family faced?
Well, I should tell you, my parents migrated from an island, a Greek island off the Turkish coast called Samos. And my father came over just before World War II, World War I started for us. And he came over and got a job. And he sent back to the island money and passage for my mother and my brother and sister, which I had, and they were in the island of Samos. And they then got on a boat and came to Wisconsin, and joined up. And so that when I grew up in a migrant family, and my first language was Greek, obviously, because that was the family language. But in any event, that was my story. And from that point on, everything that I did was, my background was the firstborn of a migrant family.
Did your family struggle during the Depression years?
Oh, yes. Not only the family struggle, but I should say that we wouldn't have made it if we weren't a family and we weren't pulling together. Now, I say that because eventually there were 7 of us. I was the third born. My oldest brother and sister came over from Greece, and I was the firstborn here, and subsequently I had 2 more brothers and 2 sisters. So there were 7 of us, and all of us, and include my dad. And during the Depression, jobs were hard to come by. I mean, there just weren't any jobs, and there wasn't any relief at that either. There weren't all these the goodies now that they have for unemployed. And so that meant, as a family, we had to pull together. And that meant, like, my oldest brother, who was 9 years older than me, dropped out of high school in 8th grade and got a job. My sister went to a normal school and got a job teaching. My dad worked on the railroad, and he worked in tannery, he worked in odd jobs, and he did everything else. Also, we planted gardens, and we sold vegetables, and we walked down railroad tracks, and we picked up lumps of coal that would fall off the cars to heat the house with, and anything to survive. But one fact remains, and this is a distincting factor because it relates to what our problems are now, the difficulty we have in seeming to get things done, is that we all work together. And our parents, while they may have had their difficulties, their first priorities were their children. They would not do anything to harm us. Therefore, when eventually in Fond du Lac, we built a house and we got a mortgage. My dad got a mortgage and they built a house. And at the same time, when my dad came over early as one of the first Greek immigrants in that community, they didn't have a church. So they built our church, and that church still stands there. And I'm still a member of that church. And they built that when they came over from Greece. We were very religious in that sense. But the main thing was that we were as a family and we pulled together. There was no difference of opinion, and our parents would give up their own interests and their own well-being in order to help their children. Now, that's an important factor, the family.
Colonel Magellan, what did you want to do with your life before the war broke out? What were you planning on doing?
Well, when I was old enough and I was going through high school, I had a knack, you might add, for mathematics. I was a math major, but I was good in all math, forms of math, trigonometry, geometry, algebra, on and on and on. And as I was going through high school, and I was told from time to time that in high school I was getting the highest marks, say for trigonometry, they ever gave anybody. Well, that led me in the field of engineering. So I had in mind that if I got to college, that after that I would like to pursue my education and get an engineering degree. And what I had in mind was civil engineering, because I'd had opportunities at that point. I had opportunities to go to summer camps or whatever and do some of this outside engineering work. And so I planned, if I graduated and I was able, I would go on to college and I would become an engineer. And that's what would be my profession.
How did you hear about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Well, we all heard it at the same time when President Roosevelt came on the radio. We were all tuned in. We knew that we were on the verge of war. We knew what was happening. We knew, obviously, that was our life, and particularly with us in ROTC, because we would soon be in the military ourselves. And so we were following events and so on. But when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, I remember all of us that were gathered around a radio because the president came on, President Roosevelt. And that, by the way, is in the documentary film Maggie's War, the president speaking out that we're at war. We were at war, we were forced into war. We stayed out as long as we could, but we could not continue as a free and independent nation in face of what was happening. So initially, we supported our allies, the Russians, the Germans, everybody on our side. And then we entered the war. And when the president said that, we knew we were at war. And we didn't feel bad about it because we knew it was coming. In fact, the opposite happened. Well, that was a rallying point when the president said, we're at war. Imagine now. You know, here you are, a poor kid, son of an immigrant family, and you're at war. That was a real shocker. But it was. In any event, then, so we accepted in stride. And the first thing we started concerning ourselves was, what would we do? What would be our role? At that time, there was a draft on. You had to appear before a draft board. Others were volunteering for Marines. Paratroopers was a new form of battle, a new form of battle lineups. That was something new. A lot of us were looked in that direction and went to Fort Benning to become paratroopers. We all wanted to play a part. I say all. Well, obviously there were a few that weren't, but speaking as a nation, we all were seeking to do what we could do and do best. And my feeling was, in case of what I knew and my background, I would do best with the combat unit.
So moving forward a little bit, you end up getting your wings and you're a full-fledged paratrooper, and they send you to Italy. Can you take me through your first experience?
Well, they sent me first. When I got my parachute wings at Fort Benning, the 82nd had already left Fort Benning and had gone to Africa. Therefore, when we were assigned to the 82nd, we left Fort Benning and went in a convoy of ships, of 78 ships, to cross the Atlantic to get to Africa. And we arrived in Oran, Africa, which at that point, the fighting in Africa was over. Rommel's forces had been defeated. The 82nd was there, and we went there to Africa. And I remember being in Oran, and then I remember Airborne Training Center. And then from there, we were flown over to Italy, and there we joined our unit. And I joined him in Italy when I appeared before Colonel Tucker and several buddies of mine, and we visited with him, and that was the only outfit I was ever with, that same company. Now, this is an almost unbelievable story. I mean, you guys listen to me, you say, yeah, well, this guy's, he's giving us a lot of hot air. No, that wasn't the way it was. World War was not that way. I mean, people responded differently. They all wanted to contribute in some way. And that's why we prevailed, because we were together, and families were strong. Important factors.
So you end up joining the 82nd. Talk to me about your role as a platoon leader in combat and how you went from being stateside to actually being a combat veteran.
Well, when I was assigned and came to Italy, I was assigned to the 504th Parachute Regiment, and I remember when in Italy, when we appeared before Colonel Tucker, the regimental commander, and he said to me and to my buddy Rivers, "You guys are going to H Company, and this is where you're going." And so we got there. We were assigned our various units, and so there we were. In the meantime, in Italy, in Mount Samucro in Italy, where we were doing battle, and the Germans had set up their winter line, we were engaged in combat with them. And in my company, there were no officers left. They were all dead. They were all killed. Snipers had killed them in the mountains and so on. So we got assigned, and we went there. And I remember my first night there, and you asked me about my first days. And I remember my first night. After we were through, and we're in the mountains, in some high point in the mountains, I was waiting to move up with the unit that I was assigned to, H Company. And while I was there, I was tired and so on, and I looked around, and I looked over there, and there was a canteen. You know what a canteen looks like. And the canteen with us, in Mount Samucro and everywhere else, also carried gasoline, because we had a little Bunsen burner that you put a little gasoline and you pump it up, and if you had a little K ration, you put it on and heat it up or whatever. So I reached over to grab what I thought was water, because there's no water canteen, and it was gasoline. I put it up and I guzzled it down. Just like that. I was thirsty. And all of a sudden I realized I drank gasoline. And I laid there in agony. And I thought that night, I wrote my epitaph. Here lies the bones of Maggie Magellas. American gasoline got him. I thought that's what my epitaph would say. But fortunately, I recovered in the morning. The sergeant that was the head of my unit escorted me, and we went to the unit, and then we got an assignment right away. And that assignment was to move forward and oust the Germans from a high point where they were using for observation on us and to direct fire and all that. To move forward and take that position from them and hold it. So deny it to the Germans. And it was part of their winter line. And so we did that. And we started out, and the platoon sergeant, a guy from Massachusetts, Mike Coogan, sergeant, said, "Sir," he said, we started out, and he was then leading a platoon. Because he'd leading a platoon, we hadn't any officer until that point. And so when I was there, he said, "Well, the officer, I want you in the middle of the unit. We're going in single file up this trail up the mountains." And he said, "I want you in the middle." He went up front with one of the sergeants to lead this thing, and I was in the middle. That was my first combat experience. We got about halfway up the mountain, and a large explosion went off. Somebody had tripped a mine, one of our men. One of the lead guys had tripped a bouncing Betsy, we called them. It was a mine that it could be dug in and exposed, the firing device exposed, and then they could be fired because you set it off the tripwire, or you did it manually, or you did it whatever. But after it was fired, it would pop up. It would pop up and scatter balls, maybe the size of marbles, or a little bit, all over. And everybody within that range would get hit, and there'd be casualties. And that's the thing we had to look out for on trails, because the Germans would mine the trails like we did. Anyway, we started out to go up to this mountain. About halfway, I heard this explosion. Somebody hollers out, "Mine, mine!" Everybody hits the ground. We waited and waited. And finally, we picked up and we started out again, and we got to our destination. And so I was up there with Mike Kogut. He then became my platoon sergeant. And I was up with Mike, and I said, "Mike, you were leading the platoon." Well, he said, "I was the leader." I said to myself then, and maybe even then, but I've said it countless times since, that I was the platoon leader, and to lead means you lead from the front. A lot of people don't understand what that means, you lead from the front. You can lead from the front with a pad and paper, and they'd say you were leading from the front. But I meant leading from the front as nothing but you and the enemy. And so when you started out this way, and you were going into enemy territory, you'd start out. But the book said, the manual said, that the officer, or the senior person, should be in the middle where he could direct the efforts of his squads. And I remembered that. And from that point on, what's your first name again? Rishi, from that point on, from the mountains of Italy, all the way through the war, I led every unit that I was with in every patrol and every attack. I led it. I was the senior guy, and I led it. That's what influenced me. Now, that wasn't the case with everybody, because the book says senior officer, should
be protected.
Yeah, be protected and direct this, that, and the other. And I thought you direct by leading, setting an example. And that's the way it was from the end of the war. That's another unique story. You aren't going to hear that from anybody else. But you hear it from me and my buddy Rivers and several others who were in that situation.
As a platoon leader, can you tell me the story about Scannell? That was the first casualty.
Who?
I believe his last name was Scannell.
Scannell?
Scadella.
Yeah, Scannell, yes. Well, he's the one that tripped off the mine.
So that was the one who tripped off the bouncing Betty, right?
Well, he's the one that stepped on the mine that killed him. Scannell. His name was Scannell.
You know, when it comes to casualties in your platoon, as the platoon leader, you're responsible for the men's lives.
Oh, I felt that way.
Can you talk to me about, it's inevitable that men are going to get killed in war. That's what it is. How did you cope as platoon leader when men in your command would get killed?
Well, in my situation, and everyone is unique depending on the people involved. When I graduated from college, I was 25 years old. I went in service, and I was a lieutenant. Once I get into my unit, and I started looking around, I found a bunch of teenagers, that kids that got out of high school and were subject to the draft, but instead of being assigned somewhere by the drafting board, they chose to pick a unit, their unit that they wanted to be with. And with me, I was 25 years old, and therefore I had a bunch of men that were 18, 19, 20, and 21. Now let me take you back to an incident. You're asking about things that obviously influenced me. That's what you want to know. And I look back on that situation, and I saw that Scannell, I don't know, he was one of these guys. He might have been a teenager because I had a lot of young guys. He got killed by a mine. At that point, I learned about mines. On the mountains of Samukro, I took one apart. I saw what made it tick. I knew how to disarm one. I knew how to that. So from that point on, I was 26, 27, 28 years old. I had kids that were 19, 18, 20, maybe 21. Now you put yourself in your own situation, in your own family situation, or any family you know. One boy is 19 and another is 26. There's a world of difference, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's another world. I knew how to disarm a mine. I knew how to do it because I learned the hard way. Why then would I, for instance, in Holland, when I got the Distinguished Service Cross, and we needed to check out a point to see if it was mine, why would I pull out an 18-year-old kid, that didn't have that experience? They were good soldiers and they were tough, but they didn't know that. And I would say, why should I, that know how to do this, send this kid to crawl forward to look for mines when he wouldn't know what to do if he found them? I knew what to do. What does that mean? That means I'm an officer. I'm not going to be in the middle of my platoon. I'm going to be leading. So you see, it's the factors in each platoon that brought about your various things. And so from that point on, till the end of the war, including the concentration camps and everywhere else, nobody ever led H Company, 3rd Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry, but Maggie Magellas. And I'm proud to sit here and tell you that, because that's a unique story by itself.
Colonel, can you talk to me about the difficulty of fighting in the mountains in Italy?
And fighting in the mountains?
Yeah, why?
Well, the difficulty of fighting in the mountains was that obviously your support in your units, in particular in Mount Samukro and on the German winter line, is that you couldn't move around during the day, because in mountain peaks the enemy had observations. They were picking off our officers and so on. So the fighting in Italy was difficult because during the daytime, if you moved around from where your cover was, which might have been back of big rocks or whatever, then the enemy could see you and you drew fire. And they had, in setting up their line, they had set firing points everywhere where we might try to cross to get into their units. They had fire focused on that. So it was any kind of movement that they could see with the visual eye. Fire started coming in. Therefore, fighting in the mountains in Italy, we had to be resupplied at night. They made a movie at that time. It hasn't been shown very much because it wasn't glamorous. It was about guys fighting in mountains. There was nothing glamorous. But they had a movie they called the G.I. Joe. And the G.I. Joe was a company commander or unit commander in the mountains of Italy, like I was doing, that was leading his unit, got killed. And he brought his body back down, and here he was. And so it was a question of a squad being not just on paper, a military unit, but a unit of people who had a similar objective, to preserve those values we held dear at the risk of our life. We had all that. That bound us together. But our experience as being an officer and learning and knowing all this, and a kid just out of high school, prompted a lot of decisions by people like me that turned down promotions because they felt they wanted to be in the cutting edge of the battlefield. And so fighting in the mountains meant that they would bring all our supplies at night. Now, what were our supplies? Well, let me tell you briefly, because this is another story. We started out, and you'd go up in the line, the Army would say then, you got to be clean-shaven because soldiers, in order to fight well, have to feel well. That's a bunch of baloney. That's why rear echelon people didn't know what it was like to fight. In any event, so when we got there, the mules would come up at night and draped over them with 2 5-gallon cans, gasoline cans, of water. And we would get a canteen full. Now that canteen full we used if we could heat something we had for food or any purpose. But to shave and use water, when there wasn't any and you couldn't get it, you'd have to be out of your mind. So what was it? Maggie didn't shave. And people said, well, the rules were that officers had to shave. I never shaved. I said I didn't care about my vanity. I wanted things with me that would preserve my life. That's what mattered to me. And what mattered to me was the same thing with my men. They had the best chance. And so that was the guiding factor with me. And I should also add that at that point, when they brought that up, they brought us 3 K rations. And they come in 3 little boxes. There were crackers in there, a piece of cheese, and a little can that you could open up with something or other. That was our menu every day on that mountaintop. Every day. But they came up at night. Now, also, I should tell you, in the mountains, while we were there, and the Germans were dug in to block us from moving on to Rome, we also had to live. We were human beings. And I always remember, and the kids know it, and Jimmer knows it, and Carol knows it, they all know it. Every Christmas, I sit back and I remember. Mike Kogut and I were back of a big rock, bigger than this table here, shielding us from incoming fire. And it was Christmas Eve. And we were talking about, what they were doing in Chippewa, what they were doing in Massachusetts, and what our families were doing. In the meantime, fire was coming back and forth. The Germans were firing at us, and we were countering battery and so on. And we were back at this mountain, and it's Christmas Eve, and that's what we're thinking about. And we could hear strains of Christmas carols penetrating up that valley that were coming up through this draw. We could hear strains of Silent Night and will come all ye faithful. I never forgot that. Silent Night. And here we are, and I write it in the book. That's how it registered to me. Here's Christmas Eve. We believe in Jesus. We were fighting for these causes. In the meantime, both sides are trying to kill each other, and down below they're singing Christmas carols. That tells you something about war. And I might add also, the Germans weren't all Nazis. The Germans, they had a religion too. Well, we never looked at them as anything but barbarians. But the Germans were strong. Now, the Nazis were bad, obviously, and they're the ones that dominated things. But when you're up in the mountains, and that's it, and a lot more, I could tell you, how a German wanted to surrender, and he had to come through his lines and come through, get up to ours, and he comes in, and he's speaking Polish. I could go on and on. But you asked me a simple question, what was it like to fight in the mountains of Italy? But that was not a decisive battle. That was just trying to get to Rome. But it was the early stages of the game.
So after the mountain fighting in Italy, the 504 goes to Anzio, and you were wounded twice there.
Correct? I was.
Can you take me through your 2 wounds? What happened?
Well, when we got there, we made the landing, like the landing forces, we didn't parachute. Initially, we were planning to parachute because the Germans would be there, and we'd jump behind them, and then our forces would come in by water and wade in, and we'd be back there helping them, and so on and so forth. At the last moment, they canceled the jump because intelligence said there weren't really enough Germans back there to risk all that, because parachutes can be costly just from the jumping part about it. And so when we got there, therefore, we were part of the landing force, and we waded in and we pushed forward until we met German opposition. And I should tell you that when we made that landing force, it was from a port near Naples that we boarded on these LSTs and LSIs, and they were Navy ships. There were the Rangers, Colonel Darby and the Rangers. They'd already made an appearance in the mountains of Italy with us, but Colonel Darby and the Rangers were there. The 3rd Infantry Division was there. Ronnie Murphy was with them. He was there. The 45th Division was there. A captain, an All-American football player from Arkansas was there with the 45th Division, got wounded, lost an arm and all that. And the British were there. And we all made this landing inland. Initially, we had little opposition. It wasn't fortified. But when the Germans realized that what we had planned, establish a base there and move on to Rome, they then sent in forces to contain us. And they did. And they brought in a lot of guns. They brought in one gun, and they called it the Betsy. It was a gun that they had to bring in on a railroad car. It was that big. It was a big gun. And they would bring it in on a high point just off the beachhead where we had landed. And they, from that point, could fire at any point at Anzio, including the hospital, which they did, and killed the nurse and doctors and others. And so they had this high ground, and they brought in forces, and they contained us there. We made the initial assault on January 20th, 1944. In June, they were still there. And it turned out to be the bloodiest battle of the war in terms of casualties.
30,000 Americans.
Yeah, I mean, you're fighting, and they got you battled in. And we were there really eventually to contain the Germans and hopefully get to Rome. And we did all that. But
so your first wound, how did that happen?
What?
Your first wound?
Well, the first Marine is my first wound is when we got in and we moved forward, and the Germans then moved in to stop us. We had to then determine where they were because we had pushed in, and we were setting up position, and the Germans brought in their forces, and they began to fire on us. We didn't know where they were. We didn't know what guns they had. It was a new beachhead. Obviously, we just made it. And so we had to patrol and find out where the enemy were. And okay. So it was me and Rivers, the only two officers alive. I mentioned his name earlier. We're the only two in our company. We're still alive. And he was senior to me. He was the first lieutenant. He says, Maggie, we got to find out where the Germans are. You take your platoon. I started out, I had 25 men. I'm now down to 6 or 7 men. We lost everybody else. Take your men and go out and make contact. Find out where in the hell they are. So I did that. And we went out and we crossed from our lines. We got back at German lines. And I always remember that, and I write about it in our book. I got my first lessons in German because we were that close. We could hear them. And we got in a firefight with them, and I got wounded. A flesh wound. I had a limp arm, I couldn't use it. And I got wounded, and then eventually we made contact, and we went back. Later in the Bulge, the Germans again made a serious attack on the British 1st Division, which is on our left. And they broke through and overrun the headquarters. And they called on us, we were on the line with them, to take a company and go there and try and help the British. Because what we had was that the Germans had overrun them. And we did that, and I led that patrol. And we got there. And we got in close combat with them. We made contact. I got in close combat with them, and we were throwing hand grenades back and forth. And I remember the hand grenades exploding on me, and I got shell fragments from hand grenades. And the medic checked me out on that, looked at me, and says, okay, you're okay. But I had 2 wounds. But in the process, I got an award for saving a British general they'd overrun the headquarters, and Maggie saved them. I don't remember that, but anyway, I don't remember seeing any general, but that's the way it ended up. That we did rescue them and so on. So I got both my wounds there. Then we pulled back, and we were there, and we were in contact with the Germans. In the meantime, our own units, I Company, was a fellow led by a guy called Roy Hanna, a lieutenant like us, had moved up and taken a position behind us at the beachhead, and got word to us as a messenger for us to pull back and join them, that we were going to reposition our forces in another line. And I pulled back off of from that high bed that we're in for protection. And I had the medic accompany me. The medic's name was Floss. He was from Chicago. He accompanied me the whole time. And we started back to make contact with our forces, and the Germans were on our heels, just popping away at us. And they were going to drive us off the beachhead. And eventually I got to there, and the evacuation hospital, and the evacuation ship, and back to Naples. That was my 2 wounds. And I can tell you, I was wounded at least twice. I don't know, shell fragments, I probably had 1 million Purple Hearts. But the Germans, and I write this exactly this way in my book, the Germans again never laid a glove on me the rest of the war. That's the last time they got any blood out of Maggie. That point, right there. From there all the way through the war, the Battle of the Bulge, everything, they never nicked me once. I don't know whether I got smarter or, my time hadn't come or what. But it was enough that I mentioned it in the book, and that's the way I put it. And I did that because at Ripon, we had a college boxing team, and I was on the boxing team. I fought at 175 pounds, and we fought other colleges on the boxing team. I said, again, that's the last time the Germans. Now, I didn't mean they didn't have us in a bad position, but they never drew blood again. That's my 2 wounds.
So after you were wounded, the 504 eventually leaves Anzio, goes up to England to prepare for Market Garden.
That's right.
And I remember reading in the book that you were in England when the invasion of Normandy happened and you saw the planes above.
Yes, I did.
Can you talk to me, obviously you're someone who wants to be on the front, all the time. What was it like knowing that the 504 was going to miss out on that operation?
Well, we knew that when we came over from Italy because we had fought in Italy for at least a month after the 82nd had gone to England, and they were preparing. When they brought us over from Italy to England, they then put us in a reserve position, instead of committing in the first assault. But in the reserve, there were a lot of them, including me, that went to the battalion commander and said, look, we don't want to be back here when we're invading. We want to go with the Pathfinders. We volunteered. Now, the Pathfinders are the ones that had gone the night before and set up guiding direction and so on to bring you in. And I was one of them that volunteered, and I went to the regimental commander, and I said, Colonel, I said, I came here to fight. I didn't come here to be in England. And he said, Maggie, we're going to need you. We're going to need you. They wouldn't let me go, but several other guys did, and their names are in the book. So that the 504 sent some of the Pathfinders that jumped ahead and set up leading devices and so on. And then after a while, then they brought us across.
He was saving you because they needed leaders for Market Garden. That's why he didn't want you to go.
Well, I don't know if they were saving us for Market Garden, but let me put it this way. Normandy would be beginning of the war in Europe. There was still a lot of fighting ahead of us. We didn't know it would be Market Garden. Market Garden, they might have known, the long-term strategists that we were going to jump in on. We didn't know that. We just knew that if we got once on the Holland in France to get to Berlin, there'd be a lot of fighting. Now, whether it be Market Garden or it'd be in Belgium or wherever it'd be, we knew that. So in other words, you're a regimental commander, and we're not on the continent yet. And the Germans hold that, and they got all the ace cards. You're not going to send your guys like Maggie that have all this experience and ought to lead troops. You're not going to send them into Pathfinders and letting you knocked off. Anybody could do that. Somebody who just joined the outfit. They'd be glad to do it. To get over there, tell them what they had to do, they drop them there and they set their devices up. And then they look for a friendly unit. But the commanders then didn't want to weaken their outfits because there was still a lot of fighting ahead, and there was.
Can you take me through the operation at Market Garden, the daylight?
Well, it can take you through, but you got another 2 weeks here. Your hour's up already.
Is it?
Well, it's got to be more than an hour. No. I can't take it. Market Garden.
Well, just tell me what your thoughts about.
Well, let me just say, Market Garden was 58 days without relief, in constant battle, constant contact. And the highlight was crossing the Wall River to capture the north end of the bridges so that the British armor could quickly move across there and get up north and continue with our mission on to Berlin. We did that. And once we didn't make that, then we were pulled off of the northern sector and brought back into near Nijmegen and set up a defensive position between us and the Germans. The Germans are still there. They still occupied. They were there. And they brought us in, and we set up our position. And we were in this high ground, and it was from there that we led patrols. It was from there that I led the patrol where I got the Distinguished Service Cross, out of that position. And so it was that kind of a battle.
I know you've talked extensively before about the Wall River crossing, but I just have a few questions that I wondered when I was reading about it in the book. It was a daylight crossing. Wouldn't the Germans see you guys assembling on the other side of the river?
Well, you're right there, but you're only half right. Not only that, but the Germans knew where we were going to cross because they had captured. Somebody was carrying some documents on the other side of the river where we were going to go, our guys. And they got a copy of our plan to cross the Wall River. Now, nobody had ever crossed the Wall River in history. In the history of war, the Huns, anybody, had never crossed the Wall River. And here we were. They had the plans. They were going to cross the Wall River. They weren't sure where, but they knew it would be around the bridges because that was our objective. So they brought in troops from wherever they could. They brought in troops, and they set up positions in a dike that rose real high, and they dug them in all along. And they were dug in, so when we crossed the Wall River, we didn't catch them by surprise at all. They knew we were coming. They opened fire on us. I think by the time we got across the river and got to the bridges, it might have been 4 hours, 3-4 hours. There was a lot of heavy fighting and a lot of casualties and crossing the Wall River. The unique thing about the Wall River crossing was, and this is something you're going to have a unique story here, and that is that when we were assigned to cross the Wall River, and we lined up on our side of the river, and there's the river, and they were on that side. When we were there and we realized what we were up against, we didn't think any of us would make it. It was a suicide mission. But that didn't deter us, because that we were paratroopers, that was our mission. But the guys who were there, like with me and my buddy Rivers, were saying our goodbyes and making our peace with the Lord. And if you make it back, go and see my mother. And guys would be there, and if they had a watch or something, they'd take it off, and they'd call the reserve troops, where I'm going, I won't need this. Here it is. Here's my watch. We didn't think we'd make it. Now, once we got across, and only half the boats were fit to try and come back. Once we got across, we had wounded. My platoon sergeant was wounded. I write about him, bandaging him. I had a first aid kit. The chaplain went with us. He had some first aid kits. We didn't have any medical forces. They didn't cross the river. So those of us in the first wave make it over there, land on the other side. We got wounded, and we still got the machine guns to contend with. And we have to clear them in order to accomplish our mission. So we go about doing that. Now, nowhere, and you can follow up on this, and you'll have a unique story, because there's no other story like in World War II or any war, where you would sign a group of men, like they did us, 2 companies, H and I, maybe altogether 200 240 men or something, and put them in flimsy canvas boats and cross a river with no backup support. You're on your own. You cross the river. Once you get there on the other side, you got to go across an area as flat as this table. That's where the Germans were. You had to go and clear them out. So we were put in a position when a guy says, where I'm going, I won't need this watch. It's yours. None of us thought we'd make it back. I told my buddy Rivers, if you make it and I don't, go to Fond du Lac and tell my mother what happened. He told me the same thing. In other words, we were assigned a mission. Now envision this. With all the brains we got and the high technology and all, we were assigned a mission. We had no backup support. We couldn't get the boats and go back, across the river again. We had to charge forward, and ahead of us were machine guns. And the Germans dug in. You think about that for a minute. And to prevail, and to rout the Germans, and to capture the bridges, it was more than just a battle. And I told you, I thought that from the time we set our canvas boats in the water till we got to the other side, it might have been 3-4 hours, maybe not that long, I don't know. But it was crossing the river with paddles. And I have a picture here of somewhere they gave me a paddle when I went to Afghanistan. They made one for me. Anyway, once we got on the other side, we were on our own. And more than that, we had to contend with Fort Hoffmann, Holland, which we didn't even know existed.
Can you tell me about how did you guys take care of that?
Well, I wrote that. I knew the fire was coming from there. So instead of my heading for the bridges, I got some men with me, and I headed for that fort. And I write about it, how we attacked the fort. And one of my men got hit there, and I set up a machine gun there. We neutralized it. But we didn't know they were there. And they were raining fire on us like crazy. So to send men in any kind of warfare where you have high intelligence and half your people in the rear do nothing but moving paper around, and you don't know there's a fort that is going to rain fire on you, that's pretty bad. But in spite of it, we prevailed. We captured the bridges. The British came across. They didn't get onto their objective, but they came across. And that was 58 days without relief. And continuous fighting with the Germans.
And that's where you got your Distinguished Service Cross.
That is exactly right. Exactly right. And that's where I crawled forward looking for mines instead of sending an 18-year-old kid to do it. And you see why I wouldn't do it. You wouldn't have done it. Nobody, none of us would have done it. We were like a family. You're going to send the youngest guy that didn't know anything about a mine, and you knew it all. You're going to sit back there and direct him. Come on now. That's not the way we fought the war. Now, maybe other outfits did, but we didn't. That's the distinction. Now, we get pulled out of there and we come back. And we're brought back to France. Now, I'll complete the other part of this. We're brought back to France. We're bivouacked in some old French barracks. And we're preparing for Christmas. It was December. And we had our personal belongings, and we set up in our companies. They were looking for Christmas trees. This was in France. The Christmas trees, we decorate for Christmas. We would do all that and get ready for Christmas. But on the night of on the night of the 17th, before that, the Germans broke through broke through our lines in Holland and were threatening the Dutch. And they called us in on active duty. Half our men were on leave. Some had gone to town for that weekend. The MPs were not looking for them. We quick got home, got our weapons together. In the morning, we were on trucks, and we're heading for Holland. We didn't know where, we didn't know why, we didn't know anything. We just know the Germans had broken through, and we're heading unstopped. We spent 62 days in the Battle of the Bulge, do nothing but defending from German advance or pushing them back, but in combat the whole time. And in there, I might add, I got two silver stars. But it was nothing but a complete battle.
Yeah, especially the battle for Hairstock. That was...
Well, the Harrisback came later. That was all part of the plan, how we were going to get to Berlin. Harrisbach was in the way. It was in the way because it was a barrier before the Maginot Line, which was what was built to stop, or the Germans had built the Siegfried Line to stop us. And we were going to cross that, and then from there, we'd move on into Berlin. But when we overran Harrisbach, which was supposed to stop us from getting to the Siegfried Line, there was nothing to hold us back anymore. I mean, the Germans didn't have another prepared position. And that's when the battle plans took shape, where the Russians said we would continue our advance, but that the Russians would go into Berlin, not us. We felt kind of bad about that. We figured if we pushed it back here, we should go in and put our guide on in the ground. But we didn't go till the Russian says you can come.
I had a quick question about Hersbach. You write in the book that your platoon was going towards Hersbach, the actual town, when they were... Give me one sec. At the battle for Hersbach, you write about how your platoon was in the middle of a road and two German columns
That's right.
came up, and I'm trying to understand, did they completely surround you guys?
No. They knew that we were moving up. They had their intelligence. They knew we were coming in their direction. Their job was to protect Harrisbach. As it turned out, I think they had a better part of two companies. They were stationed there.
Yeah.
Harrisbach by itself was not a military objective. It was way off the front and so on. But it was a barrier on the way to the Siegfried Line, and they wanted to stop us there. So when they came out, when they knew we were coming, and we were through the woods, and we left early in the morning, and they were able to obviously track our movement. And when we got near there, they then decided that they'd stop us before we could get to Harrisbach. So they sent out these two companies, or the better part of them, and they come down the road. It's a narrow road. It's a dirt road. It's in trees all over and blah, blah. It was not clearly defined. And they sent down one column this way and one column this way. In the meantime, we're coming up the road, in the middle of the road, and I got pictures of it, of us on tanks. We got behind tanks. We got behind anything to get to Harrisbach. But the Germans came out to stop us before we could get to Harrisbach. And that's when we ran into them. And the first thing we knew, we were in the middle of them. And we opened fire on them. They didn't know there was there. We didn't know what the importance of Harrisbach was. It was that we were going to take Erzbach. And then we would have continued on and crossed the Siegfried Line and on to Berlin.
And you talk about how it was almost like point blank fire.
Pardon me?
You write about in the book how it was almost like point blank fire, how close the Germans were to you guys.
I didn't quite hear that.
Like it was point blank fire.
Close one?
Yeah, you guys were so close to each other.
Oh, okay. What we were, first of all, let me say that we prepared to do some fighting. We knew that this would be defended. So we were prepared, and when we came, we had our weapons, but we distinctly, when we started out this morning, gave everybody a double load of ammunition. We did that when we thought we'd get in a heavy fire. And we took our other weapons. And also, on this occasion, we got some Composition C. Are you waiting for somebody?
No, I'm not waiting for him.
Okay. Also, we got some Composition C, which was a plastic explosive. And that could be molded and could be made into a bomb, which we called a gammon grenade. We had that, and I had a gammon grenade in my pockets, and I had a bar of this with me. And I also had a Thompson submachine gun. And this I used as the platoon leader when we got in close range. All I had to do was put it in my hip and fire away. In preparation for that, I took clips that come in that that you put in the breech, and I welded them together. So I had one this way, and the bullets this way, and the other one this way. So I had two of them here. In other words, when I used up one of my clips, I could eject it and turn it over and put it in without losing a beat, instead of fumbling around trying to find more bullets. I had a packet full of doubles. So when we got there and we were in the middle of the Germans, and they were there in force, and we were there and we fanned out into them, they were all around us. All we had to do was open fire, and we did. And it was close range, because we were there. Some of them fled, some of them went back into town, some of them left, some of them did something else. But by our count, we killed over 200 Germans and never lost a man. That's probably why they wouldn't give me the medal, because they probably thought they all surrendered and then I shot them or something. Who knows? I mean, you just can't rationalize anything in heated battle like that. But the fact was, we opened fire. And I got this report, and maybe the rest of us heard it too. The next day, General Gavin came through there. He had been with the 1st Battalion. We're going to make the other entry into Erzbach. It was a 2-battalion objective. In fact, 2 platoons got it. Me and Rivers got it. It was a 2-battalion objective for us. And then in any event, he came through the next day, and his aide, Rufus Broadway, Dr. Rufus Broadway, who died recently, was with him. And Rufus Broadway looked at this, and there were bodies all over, laying there. And Rufus Broadway told me, and I might have even put it in the book, I don't know, that they could have walked in there without stepping on snow or the ground, just dead bodies. They were laying all over. And we moved on. We went to the Siegfried Line. We got there, wasn't anybody defending it. The guys that were defending, we'd already annihilated them in Erzbach. That's when the Russian plan took over. They were going to go into Berlin.
What explains, though, if there was about 200 dead Germans, what explains your two platoons not taking on any casualties?
You answer that for me. I'd appreciate it. We got the drop on them. We had the leadership. And I asked the same question. Let me just say, when I wrote that, I took a lot of time. I called everybody that was still alive that I could talk to and says, what do you think happened that night? After all, this was the mighty Wehrmacht. And what do you think happened to them? Because I had the same question. You know, the Germans have been tough. They were good soldiers. Now, admittedly, near the end of the war, they weren't what they were at the beginning. They weren't that good of soldiers. And this guy said, and this sergeant said, I'll tell you what it was, sir. He says, leadership. He says, we had a situation and we reacted. We had leaders and we moved in. He said they didn't have any leaders and they panicked and broke ranks and had no order. And that's why we were to mow them down. That was his definition. I accepted that because I didn't have a better one. I don't know why. We weren't even sure how many. The figure on the dead ranges from whatever it was. But by ours, we killed at least 200 Germans.
And then right after this incident, you guys go to Herzbach, the town, and isn't there some house-to-house fighting that occurs there?
Well, we didn't do that. Rivers and his platoon went into the town, and I took my men, and I went to set up a protective barrier in case they counterattacked or came back. So I wasn't in on that. But Rivers and Sims and the rest of the guys went in, and the Germans that were there had gone into the basement because there was a lot of fighting and shelling. And they called them out, and took them prisoners. And when I got back there from where I was at, and I saw Sims, and I got back there, the Germans were lined up. They were preparing to send them back to the rear as POWs. And they were coming out of the houses and wherever they were. I didn't pay any attention to that. I mean, but that was it. And the thing about it is, there have been at least 5 sources, at least, that have said, eyewitnesses, and in film, they saw Maggie knock out the tank.
Can you tell me that story?
Well, I'm not going to get into that. That's, I could be here 1,000 years. I'm not going to knock out a tank. I'm running out of breath, frankly.
No,
Any event, no, just a minute. Read let me tell you.
You probably got about 10
You got the
minutes
book.
before they're gonna kill you.
Listen, you got the book. The details on how knocked out the tank is there. I mean,
And you got about 10 minutes. What is something you would really want to share?
well, I mean, this I got it in fine print written.
I know, but something you want to share verbally, not in writing.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about the Medal of Honor?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm not going to talk about the Medal of Honor. Except, as you know, the bill has been introduced in the Congress in 4 administrations, and nobody's ever responded to it. So it's there, and somebody said, well, now, you said it, well, Trump is the president. Well, he's the president, but he still lives in the White House like the other guys did. And now what that means, I don't know. But the fact is that that the president, Trump, which we thought would be a new regime, is approaching a year and a half, and people have. I got a nice letter from him on my birthday. He wrote me a beautiful letter, called me Maggie and everything. But in the White House, they don't have. The staff members had all that, so that didn't work.
Colonel, I know you don't want to get into the whole tank story, but can I just ask you one question about it?
Yeah.
Can you explain to me, when you see a tank that's firing at you guys, what possesses you to go to it and knock it out like that? I'm trying to understand.
It isn't. You're in a battle. If he'd had a bow and arrow shooting at us, it'd been the same thing. That was his weapon. They were firing at us with a tank. Why? It was because it was a tank. One of the guys that was there on the scene, and you go back and look at Maggie's War, George Hyde was there, and he was with me. And he said, we were doing great, we were mowing them down, and he said, all of a sudden, he says, a tank appears and opens fire on us, and we look for cover. Now, that's written, and that's in the documentary. We look for cover. And he says, and I look up, and I see, this is his language. It's in the documentary. I see some crazy son of a bitch charging that tank. He said, I don't know what it was then, but it was my platoon leader. He says it. He saw it. Some crazy son of a bitch. Well, why did I charge it? Well, it's because I was older and it was a tank. I knew how to disable the tank. Knock out his tracking mechanism, he can't move. But they still had them machine guns in there. They had to be silenced, or our mission would have failed. So what do? You get an 18-year-old that never saw a tank before and say, go knock out that tank? No, hell no. You do it yourself, and you respond that way, like anything else. It was all part of this war, and all part of it. And so a tank appears, and like I said, it could have been anything. But the thing is, to conclude this, he says this, and also others say this, that this tank appeared. Also, the History Channel reenacted that battle. I don't know if you ever saw their reenactment. They've had it on the History Channel. And they write, and Carol has a copy of their statement, they write in there that Maggie deserves the Medal of Honor. They write it, the History Channel, and they showed it. Then after that happens, along comes Jim Gray, and he takes us to Paris, and we go to the battle sites, and we go to Harrisbach, and we go to where we fought, and we're pointing out where the Germans were, and we hear the story from the guys who were there. That's there, that's in print. So we got that from Jim Gray. And also, I wrote in considerable detail, and others wrote in detail. And also, there are two other documents regarding the medal. One of them is from Paul Ryan. We have a copy of his statement somewhere, and he says, it's a speech he made just recently, within 6 months, just recently. He was making a speech, and my name came up, and he said, I talked with Maggie. He was at another function than I was at. And he said, I talked with Maggie. And then he looked around, and here's this crowd. And there were a lot of big people there. There were a lot of big money people there. And he looked around, and this is what's in writing. And he said, I talked with Maggie Magellas, and Maggie Magellas is America's greatest living war hero. He puts it in writing. Speaker of the House. Well, he's not going to lie. What purpose would be for him to lie? He puts it in writing. American Airlines has Skyball. There are 2,000 people there. They bring in Tony Orlando. He makes a big speech. Then he deviates and he has me stand up and so on. And he says, Maggie is America's greatest war hero, period. He says it. All this is there. But when Sims asked for a review of all the documentation, he did talk with the review board, civilians, staffers, worked for the Secretary of Defense. They weren't military. They said, "Oh yeah, well we read the letters from the eyewitnesses, which Jim sent them originally, 5 of them, and we accept what they say." They accepted the fact that they saw me knock out a tank. But he says, even with that, it would not change our recommendation that the Silver Star is adequate.
They're
Now you
wrong.
figure that one out.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a war genius to figure out that if you knock out a tank, it's got to mean something.
I just have 2 final questions for you, sir. What life advice do you want to give to the future generations?
Well, I tell them this, and I say this at speeches I make. I talk about things that I saw. I talk about going to a concentration camp. I talk about what it meant to be fighting for a cause greater than yourself, and how you responded to that.
Can we have 5 more minutes? Sure. Okay. Okay. We got about 5.
Thanks.
And how you responded to that. And then I go on and I say, and I saw this, and I realized what we were fighting in the war to eliminate the monstrosity that the Nazis has created, and that was a cause greater than myself. And then I stood up and said, and I'm proud to be an American, always will be. Now what I'm saying is, I was proud to be that American. Right now, we've lost our way. But the basis is still here. It's still a great country, still a great people. But we got to find our way and be able to agree and do something. But then we did, and that's who we were, and I'm proud to be that. And I'm still that person. And there's a lot of us around here that are still those persons. But we have to find our way. Because right now we're a little, I don't have to go into it, and I'm not criticizing. It's the situation right now is difficult. Okay?
Last question, sir. What kind of person do you always want to be remembered as?
Be remembered as? I want to be remembered as a man that was firstborn of an immigrant family that lived in this country and got an education here and had a great life and was treated great. And I joined the service because I felt I want to contribute to this cause greater than myself. And I did that. And I chose to, I had the opportunity, I didn't tell you this, but when I went to Fort Bragg, I had the opportunity to go to the Pentagon and be a staffer. I turned it down. And that Maggie chose, and he could have done whatever he wanted. He chose to be with the fighting men and be where the battles were fought, and he wanted to be there where he could smell gun soap, and that he was with men that with him created a brotherhood, who died for each other and fought for each other. And that's what made our country great. And we're still those people. But in other ways, right now, we're a little on.
But also, you're going to be remembered as a great father and as a great grandfather, and that may be just as important as what you did in the war, because that's what you're going to be remembered as, your family, as the patriarch of your family, and as the person that your grandson and your wife and your everybody else. That's what your legacy is going to be. That's what your living memory is going to be, is your family and the way you raised us.
Kids, yeah.
That's the way you're going to be remembered.
And so they know what their cause greater than themselves is. And they'll always be that way.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, that's a long story, but...
Thank you so much.